Who's got the better barbecue, Chicago or Kansas City?
It's not a question, it's Kansas City. Who's got the better hot Italian beef? The answer is nobody, because it's not a very good sandwich, no matter what the bear tries to tell you.
Why are all these people working in this meatball shop? Still the greatest TV review of all time.
Hello, and welcome to Expected Own Goals Preview Edition. I'm your host, Eric Morgan, a former soccer writer for Howler and Deadspin.
And I'm Evan Davis, analytics columnist for Equalizer Soccer. We are headed to the Midwest today.
We have got the Midwest Mobtown connection, but that is not the connection we are talking about today. We are talking about two teams that were just not very good last year. One team that was particularly atrocious, another team that was...
Maybe had a little bad luck.
That was unfortunate, but I'm not sure they're headed in the right direction. So, Evan, who do you want to start with?
I would like to start with Chicago.
Woo!
Mainly because this is a franchise that has been historically one of the top four in the NWSL. They used to make the playoffs pretty regularly. They made a couple of finals. They got Sam Kerr to play for them for a few years. This is a team with a fairly hallowed history. And then it turned out that Rory Dames was an emotionally abusive demon, and his owner was trying to cover for him. And it all came crashing down. A year later than maybe it could have, in that they made the playoffs in 2022, but it did end up coming crashing down. But now they have a new owner in the seemingly least intolerable member of the Ricketts family, Laura Ricketts. And they have a new team president, they have a new general manager, and they have a new head coach. And they have a new talisman signed to a long-term, very lucrative deal to build around. So I think this team is going to be pretty dire in 2024, but, you know, they seem to be possessed of long-term ambition to get back to the mountaintop.
There's really only one direction from last season.
It can't get any worse.
It really, really can't get any worse. You had come up with this metric the other day when we were trying to sort of assess the value of Asisat Ashwala's signing with BFC. And it was, and more generally, analyzing European players and American players. And what we agreed was that sort of the top-end opposition in Europe means usually just a handful of teams in their league. But in the NWSL, with its tremendous parity, means you really can't exclude a lot of teams from the data.
And to that point, when I ran a Z-score, basically measuring the standard deviation against the average of the league's expected goal difference for 2023, the entire league, and that includes the Portland Thorns, San Diego Wave, all the best teams, were within one standard deviation of each other. There was not a lot of spread in quality. And of course, you could even see that just in raw numbers, whether it's points, whether it's goal difference, what have you. The Chicago Red Stars, on the other hand, were the glaring outlier from pretty much every possible facet, whether it was points total, raw goal difference, expected goal difference. They were the odd team out. And so when we were calculating striker performance against top opposition, so to say, the only team in the NWSL we left out for 2023 were the Red Stars.
Holy shit, they were bad. They recorded 22 XG against 42.6 expected goals against. For a negative 20.4 XG over a 22-game season. They were losing by an XG a game.
Yeah,
for the season.
That's in a league with such parity and with such a reputation of being the, quote, most competitive / best league in the world. That is hard to do.
The fact that they won 7 games almost feels like a fluke. The fact that they recorded 24 points feels like it overstates what they did. They scored 28 goals against 22.3 XG. They conceded 50 goals against 42.6 XG. So, yeah, they conceded a lot more than their goals against would suggest. but they also scored a lot more than they deserved.
Yeah.
This team was just as bad as you thought they were.
Yeah, pretty wild. And what's hilarious is that they still had good players on their roster, two of whom made big money moves in the offseason, Tierna Davidson and Casey Kruger. It's just that they were way, 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 way less than the sum of even the most meager of their parts. Listen, it's never fun to lose Mal Swanson for basically the entire season. No team is going to want that. And her coming back on a big contract, no matter how rough around the edges the rest of the lineup is going to be, the team is going to be better simply for having Swanson there. And it doesn't stop there, though. That's sort of what has made their offseason really, really interesting. They, even before they had hired a GM, they went out and did some fairly savvy business to bring in some pretty good players, some of which are like, best 11 candidates every single year, others who are like mid-tier but very solid producers, all targeted, by the way, toward solidifying the back line. And you think that, yeah, okay, all right, let's go. Let's trade away. Let's trade away some allocation money and get Sam Staub. Let's go out and ask Portland if they can scoop up Natalia Kuika against their restricted free agency. Let's poach Shea Groom from Houston now that she is getting healthy again. That's smart business for a team that is starting from the bottom and needing to ensure that they stop leaking goals. And then maybe the best signing of all, they hired Lauren Donaldson to be their head coach.
First off, Sam Staub was, for me, the best defender in the NWSL last year. Not necessarily as a raw defender, but as an offensive, progressive center back. Mm-hmm. Just a totally unique skill set. And for a team that has Mal Swanson, the prospect of Staub to Swanson, maybe just direct, is something that will keep you in games even when your back is up against the wall.
We recently talked with Kieran about Bay maybe deciding to switch to 4-4-2 suffer ball. That is what this team probably is going to be, because they lost Casey Kruger, they lost Tierna Davidson, they found at worst lateral moves in their replacements with bringing Staub and Kuika in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great. It's the midfield that they have not really been able to upgrade even a little bit. And that's the thing that's going to keep them held back despite the improvements elsewhere on the field.
I think you go back to front on this team. And again, like the losses of Kruger, Bianca St. George, Ella Stevens, for a team that had a lot of things not go right for them, the four players that they lost this offseason are some of their better performers from last year.
I mean, certainly for a team that was begging for goals, like Ella Stevens actually managed to generate a healthy amount of chances.
Of Chicago's measly goal total, she did score 4 of them, which tied her for the team lead. She is a fine chance. She is somebody they will miss this year, even with Mal Swanson back. And you look at this team, and I think the first problem that we begin with is right there back in goal.
Yeah.
With Alyssa Nair, who we're recording this after Alyssa Nair sort of had a renaissance performance.
Quarterfinal against Columbia. Yeah.
A true 100th cap renaissance performance where she rolled back the years. For Chicago to be successful this year, she'll need to roll that back for the entire season. And I just don't think that's happening.
Yeah, and it's not a position that they have really expressed a lot of interest in developing, knowing that Nair's time is probably coming soon. I mean, it's going to be her age 36 season. They went out and signed the Jamaican keeper Sydney Schneider to be her backup because her backup last year, Emily Boyd, left the sport. So don't really know much about Schneider and how she can play in this environment. She may be called upon more than they were initially anticipating, depending on how Donaldson wants to proceed with Nair going forward. It's probably the case that Nair just is the number one. So they need to ensure that she does not face as many high-quality shots as she did last year, because even when she faced meh-quality shots, she was still letting things slide. So Staub helps that. It certainly takes a lot of pressure off Tatum Milazzo. Kuika helps that, very defensively minded fullback, in ways that Kruger maybe wasn't. Maximilian Rau, a veteran of Bayern Munich, 30-year-old veteran of Bayern Munich, will be quite stout, I think, at left back.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So there is there's stability that maybe prevents some shots from even occurring that Nair saw last year on target. But it still doesn't address what happens when a team wants to break through the middle, because it's likely that the midfield is going to be Shea Groom, solid player, always had a soft spot for Shea Groom, but behind her are going to be Carrie Riccaro and Giulia Bianchi, as it was last season, and that was a really, really frustrating defensive hole in a place that a team really can't afford a defensive hole, particularly from two central midfielders, let alone one.
This is a team that, as we go through, has, almost by virtue of having a healthy Mal Swanson back, improved. But position by position, has at best held serve other places.
Mm-hmm.
And we're outside of Mal Swanson, I don't really know where the goals come from.
Yeah, they'll probably turn to Penelope Hocking as the 9, which is where Hocking spent most of her time last year. I mean, she's a young player, so, 0.25 non-penalty XG per 96. It's fine. It's solid. It's
on a team that bad, yeah.
But that, and you can see sort of like how the pairing with Swanson can work. Hocking can be the bully, drag center backs around, and give space for Swanson to do what she does on the ball in more open space. I think that's a relationship that can develop rather nicely. But your point does still stand that, like, if Swanson isn't scoring, who is scoring? Because strikers have fallow periods. Swanson could get injured, God forbid. Other things can happen. And they've brought in Cameron Biegalski, who has not played very much in recent times. And when she has been on the field, she has not been particularly good. They rolled out Ava Cook for almost 1,100 minutes last year as a rookie, and she struggled. Yeah, I mean, there's really no other way around it. She struggled. If her job was to put the ball in the back of the net, she struggled.
So I guess the question is, and we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about sort of Tierna Davidson and how one assesses talent after just a calamitous season like one endures under Chicago, like in Chicago. How much do we want to look at last year's numbers and really draw from it? And how much do we would just want to say, Mal Swanson's back new season, maybe we just write that one off from an evaluation standpoint?
Well, I think that the presence of Donaldson really does kind of change the calculus. I mean, this is a coach that has a very, very high reputation in the States as well as in Jamaica. I mean, he got Jamaica to the knockout stages of the World Cup, which is a really extraordinary feat considering that roster that he had to work with beyond Bunny Shaw. Like, he really effectively was able to use game state in phases of play to play lockdown defense and squeak out results. And that is the kind of philosophy that Chicago is probably going to have to obey, with Swanson playing the Bunny Shaw-esque role. I mean, she's not the target number 9 that Shaw is. She does something different, but just being like the one sort of talismanic focal point of the attack while everybody else just tries to make sure that she eventually gets the ball and that they do not leave too much space between the lines. So I think a lot of tactical discipline was missing last year, which was not really anybody's fault. I mean, it's not even really Chris Petroselli's fault either. Like, he was put in a very unenviable position when Rory Dames was fired. He had to come in and pick up the pieces in 2022, and he had enough talent still on the roster who weren't trying to jump off of a sinking ship that they were able to squeak out a playoff spot. But the team was widely known to be for sale. Before that happened, the owner clearly had checked out because Arnhem Whistler, who had worked the press so well for so many years by making himself available, calling the press, tweeting with fans in the media, really sold the world a bill of goods on the kind of guy he actually was. And the moment he didn't have to give a shit, he stopped giving a shit. And there was just no resources available anywhere off the field for Chicago to maintain any levels of proper training, frankly. So just having an owner who is actually caring about what happens to the team and putting money into the team, and having a head coach who made his name on the international stage as being a guy who like takes a bunch of also-rans and keeps them tight and just makes sure that they don't leak too many goals at in the right moments. That could be enough. At the very least, it could be enough to not have them finish 14th.
I think there are reasons to feel optimistic or cautiously optimistic about this team being better. Do I think Lauren Donaldson can work magic? His relationship with Mal Swanson,
which goes back to when she was a teenager in Colorado,
is a long and storied one. This feels like a way in which Mal Swanson is really being appeased. I don't necessarily think that that's a great way to build, but a healthy Mal Swanson is really one of the most powerful players in the league. And if Lauren Donaldson can take that Jamaica DNA and translate even some of it over the course of a season and just catch a little bit of luck, you're right. This is a team that has some measure of upside despite its losses / replacements. It still, when I look at it, feels like just a deeply uneven roster, if I'm being charitable, and a roster that will still struggle to create offense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if there's any advantage to what they had last year, it's like they'd never really had a natural number 10 last year. And whatever Shea Groom might be now, at the very least, like, she is trained as a progressive-minded central mid who can fit in that slot and potentially find seams as you are moving the ball into the final third. I'm not saying that that's necessarily going to be successful because she basically didn't play last year thanks to injury, and she's not getting any younger. So, but the fact that they even have a player who fits that profile takes some pressure off Penelope Hocking always having to like come deep to receive and potentially release players behind her. You know, it takes the stress off of Swanson playing that role, because Swanson was sort of playing as the 10 in the first month of the season last year before she tore her patellar. So, and she can do that because she is just so naturally gifted, but you want her on the wing driving into space.
Mm-hmm.
So having Groom there at least settles some measure of positional balance in the side.
You can see the connective tissue that gets the ball from the back to the front now in a way that I think was not visible last season in Chicago's team.
Absolutely. And again, like having Staub there, who really is, from the center back position, the best long passer in the NWSL. If Donaldson kind of does a 4-4-2 hit and hope, Staub over the top to Swanson is not the worst way in the world to at least try and nick a couple of 1-0, 2-1 victories.
If you're Lauren Donaldson, what's keeping you up at night right now?
Center mid. It's the 6 and the 8. Like, Gotham is jumping out of their shape and just trying to overrun Staub while she's trying to release something, and they just don't have the time to play along. Like, even if that is not an option because teams are being so aggressive on them, then how do you progress the ball through the thirds? Is it solely Maxi Ral's job? Like, is that just your progression outlet before you get to Swanson and Groom further upfield? Riccaro and Bianchi don't really have that ability. And then going in the other direction, once the first line of pressure is broken, they are not players who can slow things down in the center of the park.
No.
And I feel bad about saying that about Bianchi. Like, she gets regular minutes with Brazil. She's been playing at the Gold Cup a fair amount. But, you know, that is also a national side that is stacked with really good players on the progressive players on the ball, and Bianchi is not even necessarily one of the 5 best in the Brazilian side to do that. So like it's going to be asking a lot of your back line to try and soak up pressure when your center mids are not able to do so. And so I think that's where opposition can find a lot of joy against Chicago, which is why, like, for whatever optimism we may have about them, even in the short term, it's still going to be a pretty rough season, I think, all told.
Yeah, I agree with that. Who knows what they might be able to do. We'll really understand the commitment Laura Ricketts has made to the team in the summer transfer window.
Mm-hmm.
They've been a little quiet in this window. They haven't made that signing that other new ownerships have.
And depth is a massive, massive problem here because, if you want to be an Ava Cook stan and squint and say, well, maybe it was the system, maybe it wasn't just, the right context, and in a different environment she'd jump up. That still is a lot to ask of a player that young to fill in a role. And hell, she might even get the starting job over Begalski and be in the 11. And that's also a lot to ask of her based on how she performed last year. Like, Ali Schlegel was pretty bad in her cup of coffee last season. And then, Chardonnay Curran was another piece that they picked up. And that's not a player you want to see gaining substantial minutes. Taylor Mom is not a starting fullback or someone you bring into games for any reason based on game state. Like, it's just the bench gets so thin almost immediately once you get past the 11, and injuries will happen. So that is something that, even if they are within a punter's chance of a playoff spot, which they likely won't be, but if they are, summer transfer window really needs to address some of those problems.
All right, let's move on and do predictions. Obviously, these predictions that we are making are for your entertainment.
Yeah, don't tweet at us, don't email us. We know that they will probably be wrong. We don't care. Have some fun with it.
Yeah, we're just doing this because it's fun, and you know what? We need to create own goals for ourselves. We already make lots of mistakes anyway, but why not make some obvious ones? Just for fun. Evan, I suspect that you and I have Chicago real close to each other.
I have them 13th.
That makes two of us.
Mm-hmm.
With the caveat that I think this team is better.
Sure.
On the whole, because it's hard to be worse.
Exactly.
But also, Utah comes into the league, and frankly, that feels like at least 3 points at home for Chicago.
For nothing else, it's a guaranteed 3 points at home, and maybe even on the road.
I don't want to say guaranteed. It's a very ugly game.
Yeah.
What's the upside? Could Chicago snag a late playoff spot? With this roster, I really struggle to see it. Yeah. League has a lot of parity. That said, they might only be a handful of pieces, and if it turns out some of their depth is better than we've considered or is better than has performed in the past, if things land, I'm trying to be hopeful here. It's not a good team. Can be a great team once again, but this isn't the year.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah. And you hope that is what Laura Ricketts will continue to do, because she made a big promise to Mal Swanson, in the form of that contract. Like, if you want to stick around here, and if you want your faith in us to be repaid, we got to do the work. So we'll see if it comes.
Yeah.
From Italian casserole, aka deep dish country, to barbecue country, the Kansas City Current.
Well, the parking's expensive.
You want to talk about an own goal? You tell your season ticket holders in your brand new stadium, oh yeah, you want to park here for the entire year? Yeah, it's going to be $800.
All right,
pony up.
We just have to mention it's unconscionable. But let's begin with who the 2023 Current were.
Better than their record.
That is a team that at times played like really inspired soccer, and I think caught some pretty unfortunate bounces. Where do we have? What was their XG last year?
So ASA has them, non-penalty expected goal difference. ASA has them at 2.3 for 2023.
Granted, there's a lot of teams very close to them in there. But that is a solid mid-table squeak into the playoffs, not a team that finishes 11th in the league.
And by the way, when you look at the roster on paper, not knowing how they finished the year, you would be like, yeah, that does feel like a low playoff seed team. You have Dabinia,
Yeah.
you have CC Kaiser, you have an extraordinary central midfield behind Dabinia in Lola Bonta and Vanessa DiBernardo and Alex Loera coming off the bench. You have Haley Mace playing as your progressive left back / wing back when you're in a back three. There are a lot of really, and Elizabeth Ball, when she's healthy, is an incredibly solid defensive center back. Like, this is a team with a lot of great pieces, but two major things happened very early in the year that kind of set the tone for the rest of the season. One of them being head coach Matt Potter being fired 3 games into the year, and we still don't know why.
Yeah.
What little information we have from the players is that Potter was liked, that he was not an issue with the roster. General Manager Camille Ashton has not given a clear answer to the press as to why Potter was let go. That's sort of Ashton's MO in general when she makes a personnel decision. She doesn't really explain herself, and she doesn't really announce it or explain it to the person it's happening to. So we're all kind of left a little bit flummoxed. So assistant coach Caroline Hueblum had to step in and performed capably, but that was not what she was expecting her year to look like. And then, of course, the other part is the complete unfettered collapse of Adriana Franch in goal, which still is kind of jaw-dropping, considering the kind of goalkeeper that she had been literally mere months before. We were not aware of any injury that might have been affecting her fitness. I'm certainly not aware of anything like in her personal life that might have affected her mental focus. It's just that somehow, for some reason, a switch flipped, and she is solely responsible for several goals that flipped results for the Current when she was on the field. And that was another thing. She even got benched at a couple of times. And this is a U.S. women's national team goalkeeper. It's almost unheard of, particularly because she's not, she's on the older side, but she's not that old.
It just was not predictable to see her fall off like that. And it is a staggering fall. She was by far, and we talk about Alyssa Nair not having a good season, she was far and away the worst goalkeeper in the league last year.
Yeah, ASA's post-shot expected goals model, if you turn it into shot stopping percentage, -8% for 2023. That is bottom of the league for goalkeepers with a certain minutes threshold.
To talk about Adriana Franch's season last year, the person that I kept thinking about was Steve Blass and Steve Blass disease.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Blass, who was a pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates, just one day lost the strike zone. And it was permanent. He went from being a solid Major League Baseball pitcher, and it is very hard to get to that level, and then he never was able to throw a baseball as a strike again. And that's how bad Adriana Franch was last year. It was, in my mind, like watching a person who was very elite playing goalkeeper not know how to play goalkeeper.
And it began in the very first game of the season where Mila Guile scored on her in like the 23rd minute. And, according to FBref, the post-shot XG was 0.18. And she scored. And it looked nasty from the way that Franch handled it. And it was sort of downhill from there pretty quickly. She had a little bit of a bounce back around the World Cup, like sort of in the middle of the season, but then fell off again and just never recovered. It's quite incredible. And you would think that in the off season, Camille Ashton would want to maybe shore that position up and find either, sign Cassie Miller to an extension or find another backup that could spell Franch if this is what Franch is now. But instead, Miller was out the door on her way to Gotham to compete in a trade to compete for Abby Smith's job. So now, who do they have besides Franch? Like, it's there's a lot of goalkeeping depth in the NWSL, but it only goes so far. I mean, they drafted a keeper named Hope Heisey out of Arizona. What's she gonna be? You know, they signed, they made a U18 player a non-roster invite named Molly Vipensky that I know nothing about, and who knows if she'll make the squad? You know, she might not, but that's who they have for keepers. Like, they are really pushing their chips in on French at the end of the day to figure this out, and maybe she will, or maybe she won't.
I think the other thing to discuss, and it's a name that will be familiar to listeners of this pod and fans of women's soccer and U.S. women's soccer in general, Kansas City got a new coach, and it's a new old coach.
Second verse, same as the first. Vlatko Andonovski back in Kansas City. Guy who made his reputation winning 2 titles with FC Kansas City back in 2014 and 2015. Has a pre-existing relationship with Chris and Angie Long, the owners of the Current, and had been living in Kansas City for more than 20 years by the time he resigned from the national team job. So the fact that no permanent head coach had been appointed after Potter's firing, combined with Andonovski leaving the U.S. job, it was the easiest prediction to make, knowing who was going to be hired there. And so it came to pass. And he has also been named the sporting director, so he has a lot of influence over roster and personnel decisions along with Ashton. So it really is a double act there. And he and Ashton made some rather bold decisions in the offseason with regard to the lineup.
I think that this is a good time to talk about the Nichelle Prince CC Kaiser trade, one that we discussed previously on the pod, but one that, now that Nichelle Prince is injured, looks yet worse than it already looked, and it looked like a fleecing to begin with.
Yeah, the only really justification you can make is that Andonovski has a very specific style of play in mind that he wants to implement at Kansas City. Incidentally, sounds a lot like the style he wanted to implement with the U.S. women's national team last year. And Nichelle Prince as an inverted winger who can pinch in and provide, more central movement in a pretty narrow diamond shape is sort of like, that's sort of Andonovski's bread and butter right now. So you could kind of see how he would think that's the right call to make for his squad. The problem is that just on raw talent, you got a worse player who's also older, who came back for the second half of the year and also played in the World Cup for Canada and performed fairly well, not bad but not great. But she was coming off an Achilles rupture, and now she's injured again and was sent home from the Canadian camp for the Gold Cup. So without her, your plan kind of gets a little bit scuppered. And you just have a right winger and a center forward and Dabinia to build an attack around.
You took a CZ Kaiser's worth of goals out of your team to become more defensively solid, and now cannot do that.
Right.
And that is when you are in the position that the Current are. I almost say currently are. Yeah. If Chicago's a team where the only direction was up from last season, Kansas City's a team where, no, there is some room for regression. There is some room to decline.
Now, in to their credit, they have made some moves to give themselves a little bit of attacking depth and possibly mitigate against the loss of a player, which Prince would now potentially be. Bia Zanorato Joao, formerly known as Beatriz, who is currently starting most games for Brazil in the Gold Cup, was signed as a number 9. You can sort of squint and think oh, well, if you play as a 3 and maybe use Dabinia as a winger, or have Dabinia playing underneath and try to push Kristen Hamilton wide, have Bia Zanorato be in the middle with Cooper on the right, you can be yeah, I see it. I can see how that can work. There's Cooper's dribbling skill on the wing and also her ability to receive in behind. You have Dabinia being Dabinia and just filling space when and wherever it's required, able to shoot, dribble, or pass when the situation calls for it. And, Hamilton while probably more comfortable in the middle, like you can adapt her and maybe like have her start centrally and like pull into wide areas for Dabinia to fill the central space from deeper positions and combine with Bia. And Bia has been playing well for Brazil. So it it's you can see it, but also can you execute it? And that's the big question.
Yeah, I think what I also don't love is that Vanessa DiBernardo and Dabinia are two of the key players on this team,
Massively so.
and both massively so, true talents, and both are heading into that part of their 30s where it starts getting like potentially a little scary.
Loa Labanta as well,
Yeah.
which would be the linking player in between. She's going into her age 31 season, so they're all in their early 30s
And like
now.
this is a time that one can reasonably expect some decline.
DiBernardo has somehow been beating back the shadow of old age. You wonder how she's going to perform this season when she went on concussion protocol in June and she never
Yeah.
came back, which is a little strange because normally if you have to go on the injury list for a concussion, it's 2 weeks. If it's a little dicey, maybe a month. To miss half a season with also Ashton and Andonovsky not providing any answers as to the state of her, you really have a lot of concerns. And your one backup option, your real good passing, deep-lying playmaker option, plays for Bay FC now in Alex Loera. So it's really got to be DiBernardo, some combination of DiBernardo and Labonta trading defensive and passing responsibilities in the middle of the park. And if DiBernardo isn't 100%, then that's a lot to put on Labonta. And Labonta is, you don't go to Labonta to snuff out attacks. You go to her to spring attacks.
It will require Vlatko Andonovsky to return to form as a manager, as a club manager, to really guide it. Like it will take tremendous buy-in and solving a lot of problems in a starting 11 and a lot of depth problems in the bench to sort of there's just a lot to overcome.
Sophia Braun is supposed to be the answer to back up DiBernardo there. But Sophia Braun has been playing in Liga MX Femenil. I mean, a strong league. Is it as strong as the NWSL? No. So, there's a reason she went there in the first place. And I don't think that she had a particularly good tournament with Argentina in the Gold Cup. So maybe she's coachable. Maybe Andonovsky can coach her up. He's done it with players before. One of the most famous things Andonovsky ever did in his career, and might be one of the things that ended up getting him the U.S. job, was the 2019 season with Reign FC in Seattle, where they were beset by a ton of injuries, not to mention the World Cup break taking away their national teamers like Megan Rapinoe, and he managed to hold that team together with sticks and glue and get them to the playoffs. Like, that has a lot to do with coaching. And we know how successful he can be as a club coach. And maybe Braun, she's only going into her age 24 season, is someone with a lot of runway in front of her for the right coach to instill a level of play that this league requires. It's not out of the question, but it is a question. It's same with Temwa Chawinga, there to be a winger or to be another attacking piece up front. But she's been in China. Maybe the Currents analytics department has strong enough data. Maybe their video scouting guys are seeing things that tell them that Chawinga can level up and maybe even play as well as her sister over with PSG. But it's just kind of an unknown right now. And like, what's Hannah Glass going to be like coming back from an ACL? Can Stina Peterson actually play at this level? I'm not so convinced. Like, you went out and you signed Bailey Feist, but for what purpose? Is it just really bench depth? And it's not great bench depth. Yeah, it's a team that I think could make the playoffs, and it's a team that I think could finish 12th, and I think that's all pretty in the cards. It's like Chicago. Like, the back line is going to be better. You're going to have Elizabeth Ball wire to wire. Very strong defensive central defender. You're going to have Lauren for an entire season when she only came in for a cup of coffee after the World Cup last year. She's the one that is the future of the Brazilian defense. So, and then Mace and Izzy Rodriguez are Mace and Izzy Rodriguez. We know what they are. So that is a step up. But much like Chicago, what happens in the next level, in the next line of defense, especially if DiBernardo isn't healthy to play full 90s for 26 games in the year.
Kansas City didn't have a particularly good draft. They haven't made a huge splash on the market. I worry that this is a team that, in an offseason when lots of teams have taken steps forward, have held pat and will be worse for it.
Yeah, if the argument is that like these are players that are perfect for a system, and this is really going to be a system squad, which there are teams that work that way and can be successful. Is Bia Zanerato that player? Like, is Michelle Cooper somebody who can fit naturally into a Vlatko Andonovski structure? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, we saw how frustrated Lindsey Horan got during the World Cup without players available for her to serve.
Oh God,
it's not hard to see how Debinha might all of a sudden take that position. So yeah, it's good players with a lot of I'm pregnant with wonder, as Pete Holmes might say. Because this is it's a team of, I like a lot of these players a lot. And I just don't know how they all fit. And if they have an injury crisis mid-year, their bench is not going to be able to fill the gaps. I mean, maybe Alex Pfeiffer and Claire Hutton are the Olivia Moultries of the future and just are ballers at high school age already. But I wouldn't expect that in 2024. Desiree Scott, for some reason, got re-signed, and there's absolutely no way at the age of 36 that she should be seeing substantial minutes, and she probably won't. But this is the bench that they have.
All right, so you're Vlatko Andonovski. What's keeping you up at night?
How best to unlock Debinha's creativity with the forwards in front of her, like how to properly structure that so it doesn't feel suffocating, but also has natural linkages and progressions. It's like, how do you get central midfield and the attack balance right? I've thrown a couple of different formations and different personnel as options. Like a classic recent Andonovski might be 4-4-2 diamond out of possession that moves into a 4-2-4 when you're progressing the ball with Prince on the left, Labonta on the right, with Hamilton and Cooper as a strike partnership, with Debinha filling channels. And that more or less gets the best players on the field for what they have, at least the ones that we know. Another way that Andonovski could do it is a 4-3-3 and push Prince higher. But also, if depending on DiBernardo's health and fitness, like, can she function as a single pivot? I don't think she can. She never really had to last year with Labonta there. But you just sense that there are real gaps to exploit if you build it as a 4-3-3.
Yeah.
So maybe is it 4-2-3-1 and you use Bia up top and push Prince to the bench, and then have Hamilton and Cooper on either wing? Yeah, maybe that's a way to do it. DiBernardo again is such an elite long passer that she can serve both Debinha on the deck and Bia over the top in ways that can generate offense, whether they're able to play through or are forced to go long because they're getting smothered. Debinha and Bia certainly already have a pre-existing relationship, and I'd be curious to see what Bia is like here in the NWSL now. But she's also our age 30 season, and she was at Palmeiras last season. So what's she gonna do? I don't know. Again, like, it's sort of a thing where you look at any of these possible formations and these possible roster combos, and you think, yeah, I see it, but also, do I see it?
No, this is as good a time as any to move on to predictions. Yeah. Oh boy, I feel like you and I are not going to have very nice predictions for Kansas City are we?
You're a little bit lower on them than I am, but I've got them. I got them 11th.
Oh yeah, I only have them 12th.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, well.
Yeah. When you listen to the Houston Dash preview with Theo Lloyd Hughes, Theo did a very good job of making me second guess putting Houston below Kansas City. But I think Houston's defense is just going to have bigger issues than Kansas City's, and that should probably be enough to sort that table out in the way that I think it will.
I do think that there is, for the purpose of our Midwest Mob Cities preview, a point in saying that I think that Kansas City's base is a fair amount higher than Chicago's, and I think that Kansas City's upside is significantly higher than Chicago's in this season. That said, where I think we both sort of land when it comes to likeliest outcomes is not a particularly promising season from Kansas City, at least with the roster as is currently constructed. That's not to say that they can't take it. I mean, there's still a summer transfer window. You know, you might get some Vlatko bounce as a new. But I just 12th feels right.
Yeah, and there's a lot on Andonovski's shoulders in this season too, because the one positive thing that came out of the World Cup is everyone saying that, oh, he's a club coach, he's not a national team coach. And then he walks into the job that was basically being held open for him, given a lot of power and a lot of control over the soccer side of things, that he needs to prove that he is worth what they're paying him.
Time will tell.
Does this sting a little bit to think about just because you have such strong Kansas City roots in your own family?
No, Kansas City's a town that's endured a fair amount of losing. Don't let what the Chiefs and the Royals have done in the last decade confuse you. Well, the Royals have returned to form. When I attended a 2014 World Series game with my father,
and your father is
we had
from
coming
Kansas City.
in as from Kansas City, yeah. He worked at an Italian restaurant that was blown up by the mob. I mean, he's really from Kansas City. When firebombed, I think. And when you sort of what we were saying about it as we were going to the World Series was like, we got to do this now.
Right. Because
the last time this happened, I was in diapers, and the next time this happens, you're going to be in diapers. And so there is a loyalty and a real quality to the Kansas City fan that, you know, the Chiefs have become, you know, so successful, they're now evil. The Royals had a really great 2-year run. Turned out we didn't need diapers for the 2015 World Series win. But this city, I think, will stand by this team even if they struggle for a little while. I don't worry about the support, but I worry about just, you know, there are still good reasons to go to games in Kansas City. Like, Dabinia really is a spectacular talent. What a treasure to have there.
When Labonta scores goals, you get the best goal sellies in the whole league.
They put up a 6 spot on the Red Stars. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Granted, it was only 2.7 XG that they generated in that game.
And it is the Red Stars.
It is the Red Stars. It was the last season's Red Stars. But it was this sort of squint promise of what could have been, of what is possible. And it's not like that's not still possible. It's just really unlikely.
Yeah. Again, a lot of pressure on this organization right now with the stadium opening up, with Andonovski sort of having this be his make or break season for the rest of his career. What will Kansas City want to be? They want to be in league with Angel City and San Diego and Portland and Bay FC and Washington and all of the big franchises that are spending a lot of money and bringing fans to the park. They've already proven that they can bring fans to the park, but now they need to step up and actually be consistent and bring some of that 2022 make it all the way to the championship vibe back. We are trucking right along through NWSL season preview week. Thank you so much for joining us in this new and exciting partnership we are having with ASA. Please remember to rate, review, and follow either the ASA feed or our own feed, wherever you're listening. Be sure to give us 5 stars if you give us any rating at all. If you Want to follow us on social media, you can do so at XOwnGoals. That's the letter X Own Goals, or also on Blue Sky. If you think we have an own goal, please email us at expectedowngoals@gmail.com. That's the letter expectedowngoals@gmail.com. Do not email us about these predictions. We know they're going to be wrong. We don't care.
Yeah, I can't wait to watch the Red Stars' current NWSL final 2024.
Yeah, the Tornado Alley Bowl.
Because the rest of the league was wiped out by Twisters, the sequel coming to theaters this summer.
All right, we'll talk to you guys next time.
Ooh, Auntie M, Auntie M.